Well, good morning, everyone. I'm so excited that you've come from all over the nation to talk about how to get engaged in the world. Now, I bring you a report back from Washington, D.C. Of course, I know that at every moment you're getting the news on your smartphones. Anyone here not have a smartphone with them right now? No one. We're in a whole new world. But I'll tell you, it's been so fascinating in kind of a terrible way to watch the conversation about health care in Washington, D.C. You had that bill come over from the House, and that bill said, oh, well, we'll just have a plan here to proceed to knock 12 million people out of health care in a single year, and 22 million over a period of 10 years. And that passed in the House of Representatives. And over in the Senate, we teamed up. We said we've got to have an inside game and an outside game. Inside game, doing everything we can inside the halls of Congress, and an outside game with groups across America weighing in. Every possible group that could come to the battle. Ultraviolet and Credo and Move On and Our Revolution and so on and so forth. And the result was phones started ringing off the hook, and our email boxes were flooded, and the streets were filled with protesters. And that House bill was pulled back. And the Republican leadership said, no, we can't do that bill. We'll do a Senate version of it. So they had 13 Republican senators, all male, all white, go into a secret meeting and have a series of these meetings and produce their bill. And this was a process that didn't involve anything that looks like democracy. 0 committee hearings, 0 amendments proposed and considered, 0 time to go home and see what your health care experts think, 0 time to consult with your constituents. What has happened to our nation that we have a legislative process that involves nothing that looks like a legislative process? It looks more like what would happen in a kingdom or a dictatorship than in the United States of America. And they came out with a new bill, and the Congressional Budget Office scored it, and instead of kicking 12 million people off in a year, it kicks 13 million people off, and basically the same number over 10 years. And really, how has it come to this, that the bill that they're putting forward does that and delivers massive tax breaks to the richest Americans? For example, the 400 richest Americans would get $33 billion from that Senate bill. $33 billion. That's enough to pay for health care for 700,000 individuals through Medicaid. What a contrast. Well, I'm happy to say that with the push of grassroots America and the strategy inside Congress, Republicans pulled back from that. And then they came forward with a new plan that has the Cruz Amendment in it. Have you heard of the Cruz Amendment? Cruz Amendment is a fake insurance amendment. It says that insurance companies can offer any plan, which means plans that will be appealing to the young and healthy because they'll cost $40 or $50 a month, but they cover nothing. We've been in that space before. And that space was one where people got sick or seriously injured, and they went to the hospital, and their insurance didn't cover the hospital. It didn't cover the x-ray. It didn't cover the MRI. It didn't cover the emergency room. And when people were celebrating that they were going to have a child, turns out it doesn't cover maternity care, and so on and so forth. And in addition, those fake policies that attract the young and healthy destroy health care for older Americans and those with pre-existing conditions and those who are sick, because those policies create now a pool of insured that needs so much care that the policies are extraordinarily expensive and people can't buy them. That's the world we used to have. But how did we get to the point that you could actually have a near majority of the Senate vote and support a bill ripping health care from millions of Americans to deliver tax benefits to the wealthiest? You know what this calls for? This calls for a new generation of progressive leaders like yourselves. And that's why I'm so glad you're here. We have to change the dynamics in America. We've gone way off track. And you're all here to put us back on track. And I'm so excited that you are here and you're going to spread the word through your chapters across this country. But what does it mean to be a progressive leader? Well, it's not a test of any one topic, but it is an attitude about the world. Hubert Humphrey, the happy warrior from Minnesota. Anybody from Minnesota? Few from Minnesota, great. You remember Hubert Humphrey? When I was an intern for Senator Hatfield back in the bicentennial year of 1976, way back then in the last millennium, I went and saw Hubert Humphrey speak. And something that Hubert Humphrey said is, he said the moral test of a government is what it does for those at the dawn of the life, their children, and the twilight of life, our elderly, and those in the shadows, the sick, and the needy, and the disabled. That was one way of putting the attitude about how we respond to those most in need. And then we can take a look at the way John F. Kennedy put this. He put it in terms of getting engaged. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. That's a pretty direct way to put it, and I think you're all thinking about that right now. Ask not what our community can do for me, but what can I do in my community? How can I be involved? Some form of civic leadership. Well, I'll tell you, we thought we put a stake through the heart of that Republican health care bill. Several times we've come right up to the brink. The Republicans have almost had 50 votes that they need, plus the vice president. And then a couple folks have said, no, it's too generous. Not too generous to the wealthy, too generous to the needy, from the conservative side. And then a few of the more centrist Republicans said, well, we have Medicaid expansion in our state and to throw hundreds of thousands of people off health care, and I can't quite go there. So it's been, people have been fading away from the two sides. But it keeps coming back. How many of you have watched the Game of Thrones this year? You cannot rest as long as the White Walkers are coming down from the north. And right now, if you go to your top news stories on your phone, as I did a few minutes ago, it says Republicans are hurtling towards another health care vote next week, just in a few days. Now, they've gone through several versions of repeal and replace, and they didn't have the votes, so they went over to meet with the president. And the president says, you've got to pass a bill. And so they're like, well, okay, let's have a vote next week. What's it going to be on? Nobody knows. Is it going to be analyzed by anybody? Nobody knows. Is it going to have any healthcare stakeholders weigh in? Absolutely not. A chance to consider what your citizens back home think? No time to do that. And what they're leaning towards is simply a straight repeal. Now, CBO did score this. Congressional Budget Office did score this. And they said instead of 22 or 23 million people losing insurance, it'd be over 35 million people losing insurance. I mean, the idea that you're going to rip health care from millions, and then in a couple years you'll think about how you'll replace it, that's why we need you all. And we need you all to be engaged and to say, okay, I'm going to make some decisions in my own life about putting more time into civic life. And I was thinking about that in terms of my own life in different moments. I had done a variety of things. I'd worked on third world economic development, then I worked on strategic nuclear policy, and then I went home to Oregon and ran Habitat for Humanity, which I absolutely loved. Anybody volunteered on a Habitat project? A lot. I mean, that's a really cool thing, family by family. But you know what? I went and gave a speech at the celebration of 1,000 Habitat houses in Oregon. And as I was giving that speech, I was thinking about the battle I was waging to try to get rid of predatory mortgages. Teaser rate mortgages. Mortgages that would be offered at 3 or 4%, but then after a couple years, the interest rate would go to 9 to 12%. And the families would lose their home. And the person, the mortgage broker who sold them that mortgage, they thought that mortgage broker was working for them, the homeowner. Turns out that mortgage broker was getting a kickback. A kickback that was larger the worse the loan was, the better it was for the investors. And so in the Oregon legislature, I was attempting to pass a bill that said no more liar loans, and no more kickbacks to mortgage brokers, and no more teaser rate mortgages. And we passed it in the Oregon House, 31-29, when I was Speaker. You can get some things done when you're Speaker, you can't do when you're not Speaker. Went over to the Oregon Senate, and they said, too big of lobby against it. We're not even going to put it up for a vote. Very disappointing. But they did make a legitimate point. That is that Oregon could only control the rules for state chartered banks, not federally chartered banks. And so when I was running for the Senate, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, if I get elected to the US Senate, I'm going to stop those predatory mortgages. And, well, fortunately, it happened. It happened that I ran for office when nobody thought it could be won because I felt it was important to be in the battle. And then fortuitous things happened, like Barack Obama created a surge of enthusiasm. We registered so many people, and so many people turned out to vote that I dislodged an incumbent Republican by a little tiny narrow margin. So thank you, Barack Obama, and everybody who responded. And in caucus, I stood up and said, we've got to stop these predatory mortgages. And when I sat down, Chris Dodd slipped into the seat behind me. He said, hey, we need you on the banking committee because you need somebody who understands those mortgages and will help stop them. I said, okay. And then I got a call from the majority leader. Majority leader says, I hear you want to be on the banking committee. I said, I'd love to be on the banking committee. He said, which of your other two major committees would you give up? I said, no, I need to be on those too. And I said, well, but could I get off my, what's called a B-level committee, the budget committee? And Harry Reid says, nobody gets off the budget committee. And he slams down the phone. And he called me back a week later. And he said, Jeff, you're on banking committee. I said, which of my major committees did I lose? And he says, no, I'm not allowed to take you off those. I said, great, I'm off the budget committee. He says, no, nobody gets off the budget committee. He hangs up again. I'm still on the budget committee. But by being there in that fight, at that moment, when we were doing the Dodd-Frank bill, we were able to put in elements to stop those predatory mortgages and return home ownership to being an American dream, not an American nightmare, so it could build the wealth of middle-class citizens throughout our nation. That's a victory. And you don't know just when the victories are going to come. You know you have to be in the battle. Let's talk about the situation with college. Who has college debt? Yeah. I did these events in which I'd have people come and we'd hand out balloons and they'd write numbers on them. The amount of their college debt, $23K, $55K, $85K, $125K. I bet how many folks have debt over $50,000? Oh my goodness. That is wrong. If we're going to be a land of opportunity, then we can't have college be a financial gauntlet. It is so important, not just to how you all can contribute to the future, but to how our entire economy thrives in the future. It's in our common interest to have debt-free college. And we have to be in the fight, and we have to win that fight. How do we do that? Well, it may not be all at once. It may not be everything here, but we can take these pieces. How about Pell Grants that are year-round and that cover a same share they covered 20 years ago of college tuition? That would be a huge change. How about if when you borrow money, if you have to borrow money, you get to borrow at the same low interest rate the big banks get when they borrow from the federal government? And how about this? Everyone who has a student loan can refinance that same low rate the big banks get when they borrow from the federal government. And how about we control this surging tuition so it's not so high in the first place? I come from a blue-collar family. My dad was a mechanic, and he gave me a blessing when I was growing up. He didn't frame it as a blessing. It was a statement. He said, son, you go through the doors of that schoolhouse and you work hard and you can do just about anything because we live here in America. Wow, that put chills down my spine. That's so cool. I was born in America where every child gets a full opportunity to thrive. Do we have a full opportunity to thrive if a classroom has 30 kids in it rather than 22 or 20? Do we have a full opportunity to thrive as the extracurricular activities in public schools cost funds, and in a blue-collar community, the parents can't afford to pay those funds, so the kids can't even join the athletic teams, let alone the speech team or the debate team or the Constitution team or the robotics team? Is it a full opportunity to thrive if the conversation in the community is the way it is in my community, which is parents saying, I'm not sure that my son or daughter should go to college because they're going to end up with a debt the size of a home mortgage and perhaps no job, and bad credit rating, and maybe they won't be able to fully participate in society thereafter. That's not a vision of opportunity for every single child. Let's restore a vision of opportunity for every single child in America, so that whether you're the son and daughter of a CEO or the son or daughter of a mechanic, you have a chance to fully participate and fully thrive. That's a vision worth fighting for. Now, there's some basic things we have to do. One is that we need to take on this issue of money in politics. Now, this is such a challenge. The Supreme Court 5-4 says there's nothing corrupting about a concentration of money in campaigns. Money, billions of money coming from just a few people. Well, I beg to differ. When's the last time you saw a Republican stand up on the floor of the Senate and talk about saving the environment? Anybody heard a speech by a Republican in the last several years since Citizens United passed? It didn't used to be that way. Who was president when we founded the Environmental Protection Agency? Richard Nixon. And who signed? What president signed the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act? Richard Nixon. It used to be that Republicans and Democrats were environmentalists. But then came Citizens United and the Koch brother cartel. The Koch brothers, who in a single year their wealth increased by $10 billion. That's a concentration of power. And then in 2014, they said, we're going to invest in the campaigns, do a third-party campaign in Louisiana and Arkansas and North Carolina and Iowa and Colorado and Alaska. And you know what? Every one of those seats went from blue to red. And the Koch brothers said, look, we own the U.S. Senate. And they wanted to make sure everybody understood that. So in January 2015, 2 months after the election, they made an announcement. They said in the next election, still, by the way, 22 months out, November 2015, and in the next election, we're going to spend the better part of $1 billion. They were sending a message that you better cleave to the Koch brothers' agenda or you'd be in trouble. They'd run a primary individual against you, or an individual in the primary, or they'd attack you otherwise. And suddenly, no environmentalists willing to take on climate disruption, climate change, global warming, climate disruption. Well, that is a corruption we cannot allow to stand. So we need to have a court that believes in the mission of our government. The mission is the first three words of the Constitution. What are the first three words? We the people. It's not we the powerful. It's not we the privileged. It's we the people. And that's the mission we're trying to reclaim. And Jefferson said the only way you have decisions that are made that reflect the will of the people is if each person has an equal voice. Now, admittedly, there were big blind spots in our Constitution when it was written. And we've worked over the last 2 centuries plus to get rid of those blind spots and make sure it is every single individual having a voice. But Jefferson, they need to have an equal voice. Citizens United is the opposite of the vision on which our nation was founded. Now, we had a chance for that to change last year because one of those 5 justices who don't understand the basic mission of our Constitution died, Antonin Scalia. And what happened? Within hours, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, he comes out and he says, no matter who Barack Obama nominates, there will be no conversation, there will be no committee hearing, there will be no committee vote, there will be no floor debate, there will be no floor vote. He said, because it's an election year and I want to protect the integrity of the conversation. Why did that happen? And by the way, it's the first time in our history it's happened. There have been 15 previous times we've had a vacancy on the Supreme Court during an election year. And every single one of those 15 times, the Senate debated and the Senate voted. Now, 11 times they confirmed the nominee. 4 times they rejected the nominee. But they always debated and they always voted. But here's Mitch McConnell saying no matter who's nominated, we won't debate and we won't vote. Now, in our Constitution, the founders, as they were wrestling with the advice and consent rule, they said there needs to be a check on a president appointing someone who was of poor character, bad character. You can interpret that in a personal sense or a professional sense. But that requires debating and voting to determine how that check is exercised. But the Koch brothers went to Mitch McConnell and they said, we don't want there to be any chance of overturning Citizens United. And so don't let the Senate vote. And therefore, for the first time in our U.S. history, a campaign was underway, a plot was underway to steal a Supreme Court seat and deliver it to the next president. In 2017, that theft was completed. I tried to do everything I could to stop it. I went to the floor of the Senate. I spoke for 15 hours and 28 minutes, as long as I possibly could. And I kept saying, Republican leaders, Democratic leaders, get together. This will severely damage the Senate. If this theft is completed, every majority in the future will be tempted to steal a Supreme Court seat. And all of us will look at the 5-4 decisions of the future and say that's not legitimate. We will undermine the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. Mitch McConnell was immune to any plea about the integrity of the Senate or the integrity of the court. And you know, he rarely smiles. But when that theft was completed, and it required changing the rules of the Senate, when it was completed, he surged up the center aisle with the biggest grin on his face I have ever seen. And it scared the bejeebers out of me. Why should one be so happy for destroying the integrity of the Senate, the integrity of the court? We have to reclaim a functioning Senate, a functioning House, a functioning court, and a functioning presidency. And you all are going to help make that happen. I'm so glad you are. Let's turn to, so we have a moment in which we can have a couple questions or comments. So if anybody, we have a microphone over here on the side, if anybody would like to ask anything. And maybe share your name and what state you come from.
Hi, I'm Danielle Pellett in Dallas, Texas. So I'm actually one of 11 people running against Pete Sessions, and I've had people tell me that refinancing student loan debt is too extreme because, I don't know, but hearing you actually say that the too big to fail bank rate was 0.25% and we should do that for our students, I just wanted to thank you because I have 6.8% interest, and when people say you can't buy a house, it's because of avocado on your toast, and I'm like, no, it's because of student loan debt, so thank you.
Yes, yes. How many folks have interest rates that are over, say, 5%? Yeah, exactly. That's why it should be refinanced. And we are seeing that people are delaying marriage because of student debt. The opportunity to buy a home, which has been the biggest wealth builder for the middle class in America, is being delayed, either because you don't feel you can afford a home because you have these big payments, or because the bank doesn't think you can afford a home because of your big payments. And so it'd be an incredible stimulus to America as well as helping a tremendous number of individuals.
Hi, Senator. Jackie Cornell. I'm with New Jersey's chapter.
Hi, Jackie.
I wanted to thank you for your work on so many different issues, but wanted to ask you, as progressives, we are so eager to present the facts, and I'm kind of thinking specifically about the current healthcare fight, right? We've got every fact and figure about why Medicaid has worked for almost 55 plus years here in this country, and yet the discourse is sort of running amok, right? We've gone beyond repealing the ACA to overhauling something that's a cornerstone to middle class families. When the facts are in our favor, but we can't change the dialogue about what's going on in Washington, what do we do?
So I do a lot of town halls. I do one an average of every 10 days since I was elected in 2009. That's hundreds and hundreds of town halls. And in those town halls in 2009, 2010, they were scary. Glenn Beck's out there, and he's saying, if you have a drop of patriotic blood, you have to go and confront your member of Congress and stop them from this plan put forward by this foreign-born, Saudi-controlled president who wants to have the government take over our health care. That was a call to arms. And I had counties where normally you might have 30 people show up for a town hall, where 500 showed up for a town hall. And we got a large room, but it only fit 200, so 300 are pounding on the walls outside. That's a scary situation. And someone would stand up and say, Senator, why won't you listen to us about health care? Why won't you listen to me about health care? I came to your town hall to tell you how bad this idea is. And I'd say, well, I'll do better than that. Not just listen to you, but let's listen to everybody in this room. And I'm going to describe the main features of the health care plan. And everybody can raise their hand, step forward or step backwards. And so, I'd say, children on your policy to age 26, how many things step forward? 90% of the people raise their hand. And I'd say, how many step backwards? A few hands would go up. Well, how about a health care Bill of Rights in which your insurance policy doesn't have an annual cap or a lifetime cap, so if you get seriously injured, you actually get health care? Oh no, we like that. How about a marketplace where you can compare one policy to the other to see which one best suits your family? And by the way, if you're a struggling working family, you can get a tax credit to help you buy those policies. Oh no, yeah, that's good, that's good. And I would go through the spectrum, and when I finished, the person standing up there who'd come so angry about health care, standing there going, well, I know there's something wrong with this health care plan, but I just can't remember what it is. And I loved doing that. Because here is the thing. The Democrats really messed up the messaging. The Republicans had a simple plan, a diabolical plan. In April 2009, their strategist, Frank Luntz, he put out a memo and it said, here's our plan on health care. No matter what the president wants to do to improve our health care system, no matter what the Democrats want to do, we must call it a government takeover and oppose it. And I got this memo, and I couldn't believe it come to that in our country, that something as important to quality of life and peace of mind as health care, they were saying, no matter if there's a great idea that we would like to do too, we're just going to play politics with it. And that's what they did, year after year after year. Government takeover, and now they're trapped. They're trapped by having told a big lie year after year after year. Because when I go out to those town halls in rural Oregon right now, I walk in, and I say, how many people are here because they're worried about health care? Almost everybody raises their hand. And people are coming out in red America to say, get your Senate hands, your government hands off our health care. It's like, 1 out of 3 people in rural Oregon is on the Oregon Health Plan, Medicaid. And many are on Medicare. You combine those. Many more buy on the exchange. You combine that. And so we have to be able to talk in real ways that connect with people. Otherwise, we will lose to the propaganda machine on the right. And they will warp any good thing into some evil plot. And we have to know that and be ready to communicate. And I think we should have every Democrat do a town hall in every county in every year, because you have to have those conversations across the aisle if you're going to learn to connect with people.
Hi, my name is Manuel Espitia. I'm from New Hampshire. Now, when there are so many barriers for young people like myself to run for office, what are ways people like yourself can encourage us to run for higher office and replace people that are not representing us the way we would like it?
Oh, well, so how can we encourage people to run? Right here, right now. I mean, we're talking about being ready for progressive civic leadership. It would be a whole range of things. But also it can mean running for office. Now, I had this vision that it was worth fighting for opportunity for every American. From the time my president laid out that that's kind of, not my president, my father said you get a fair chance because you're born in America. I thought that is cool. And I ran nonprofits, and I did think tank work, and I worked on strategic policy and a host of things. But I found myself when I was back in Oregon going and talking to the city council and saying, hey, you're going to invest dozens of millions of dollars in the downtown, but my neighborhood over here needs community policing. I was living in primarily an African-American neighborhood. We had a big influence of the blood gangs coming up from LA area, and the services were substandard. And so I was going down and I was talking about affordable housing. And along the way I started thinking, it might be easier, instead of having to go and persuade people that they need to pay attention to issues, to actually get elected to fight for those issues. And that's when that little thought in the back of my mind that maybe I'll run for office someday. And fast forward, I've been developing, went from Habitat, and then I started something called IDAs, Individual Development Accounts. First one west of the Mississippi. It came from I started developing rental housing, but I had that vision of home ownership. So why not give matching grants to enable people to pursue one of the three pathways into the middle class: education, small business, and home ownership. And so we started this IDA program. And then, but then I thought we should get state legislation to help support the funding for IDA programs. And kind of this help up attitude that can bring Dems and Republicans together. And so there happened to be an open seat. And I said to Mary, hey, I think maybe I should run for this open seat. And we had a long conversation about it because our son was just turning 2. Mary was giving birth to our second child in March of that year. March was the registration deadline for running for office. Men, if your partner is having a second child the month that you start running for legislature for the first time, not a good idea. But we did it. And I went to a training. And I went to specifically a campaign training 2 years earlier that was being sponsored by the DNC. So 2 years earlier, I'd had this thought, maybe I'll do this someday. And I saw this blurb that said, hey, there's a free training in LA, 3-day training. You can come and be trained for the finance side of campaigns or for the management side of the campaigns or to be a candidate. So I called up a childhood friend. I said, hey, let's go down there. Then I called up the head of the state party. And I said, hey, let's publicize this. Let's get 100 people from Oregon to go down to this training, and then we'll come back with all this enthusiasm, and we'll transform Oregon, which had a Republican House and a Republican Senate, I might add. And, how many people went to LA? My friend and I. That was it from Oregon. And so publicizing and encouraging people to become part through what you're doing now, and if you're interested in campaigns, how many people are thinking about running someday? Hallelujah, let's give them a hand. All right, thank you. And so go to a MERGE program, go to a labor training, campaign training camp, go to a DNC training if they have them. Because those 3 days were very helpful for me seeing that there was a way to do this. They had this chart that was kind of like an archery target. And in the center, it said these are the most effective things you can do when you're running for local office. In the middle was knocking on doors. And you know what? Costs nothing. And I'm like, wow, that's great. The most effective thing is free. And the next ring out was going to your community meetings, to the PTA meetings, to the school board meetings, to the community association meetings, and talk to people on the way in and talk to the people on the way out. Free. I'm like, that's the right number. Beautiful. And the next most effective thing was calling people up on the phone. And so I had this in my mind that I didn't have money to put into a campaign. I didn't know how to raise campaign money, but the most effective things were free. So when I ran, and so this is 1998, when I ran, I started jogging between houses and knocking on doors. And I'm like, I'm doing the most effective thing. It's not costing me a thing. I went and bought a ream of bright yellow paper, 500 sheets. I ran it through my home printer, and it just basically said, I'm Jeff Merkley, I'm going to run, and we need to reclaim our neighborhood and have a champion in Salem. It said something like that. And it cost nothing. It cost a couple dollars to buy this ream of paper. And I signed my name on it. Sorry I missed you, Jeff. And before I'd go out, I'd sign 100 of these. And if they weren't at the door to talk to, I'd put them in. And suddenly I was underway. And when I became Democratic leader, and I spent 4 years of my life, so here's a key moment. This is one of those decision moments in your life. So I had served 2 cycles in the Oregon legislature, 3 cycles, and I was so frustrated with the Republicans controlling the Oregon House, stopping all our good environmental legislation, stopping affordable housing legislation, stopping equality legislation. And so I said to Mary, I said, hey, I think I should either not run for office again, have my role in the nonprofit world, raise our kids, or I should quit my job, my paid job, and do everything I can to change what's going on down in Salem. And Mary had those magical words. She said, whatever you decide, I'm with you. I quit my job the next day. And that's at some moment down the road, you're going to be invited to be part of a project of some kind. And you'll have other things in your life you're going to have to set aside to be able to be involved in that. And you'll have to ask yourself at that moment, within your family, can you make that decision? Sometimes it's not a right fit, and you wait for a different opportunity. But the fact that you're prepared to seize that opportunity. Just shortly thereafter, the Democratic leader stepped down, and I decided to run for the leadership of the Oregon Democrats, House Democrats, and I was kind of thought of accurately, I'll admit, as a policy wonk. And people tend to elect as leaders charismatic individuals. Yeah, okay, I'm a policy guy. And I had bills to solve things, and I worked them person to person to person throughout the legislature. But we had a very charismatic individual who was already lined up to be the new leader. But I thought, the work I've done in life to build organizations, build Habitat for Humanity, build Human Solutions, build the World Affairs Council, the teamwork, that's what we need. We don't need a charismatic leader. We need somebody who can build a team. And so I decided to run. And I remember calling up the members of my caucus, and they'd kind of laugh. Jeff, really? Do you think you have a shot at this? I said, well, if you support me, I have a shot. Turned into a 3-way race, in which in the first round of voting among the 3 of us, 1 person won and 2 people tied for second. The next round of voting, a different person won and 2 people tied for second. So all 3 of us were within 1 vote of getting knocked out. The next round, 1 individual lost out, and then I picked up the balance of the votes and I became Democratic leader. And I said, we have to completely change our fundraising. We have to completely change our recruiting of candidates. We have to completely change how we deal with consultants so we get a lot more help for the amount of money spent. And in 2 cycles, we knocked the Republicans out, and in 2007, we had the most progressive session of legislation, because we had a whole policy agenda, because I'm a policy wonk. We had a whole policy agenda, 12 items. We passed every single one of them minus 1. So you never know where that opportunity is going to be there. You just have to throw yourself into it, attend things like this, be inspired, go to campaign trainings, and then when the moment occurs, wrestle with it and jump in. Thank you all so much.
Can we all give the Senator another round of applause, please?